Greetings and welcome to Unit 4, the Executive Branch. In this lecture, we're going to look at the qualifications of the Texas Governor. We're going to discuss the roles and responsibilities of the Texas Governor. Then we're going to look at the plural executive branch of Texas government and explain the roles of said plural executive branch. We have a lot of ground to cover as usual, so let's just dive right into this. So, constitutionally mandated requirements in order to be the Texas governor. Okay, so this is clearly established by the Texas Constitution. Candidates must be at least 30 years old, resident of Texas for at least 5 years immediately before the election, and must be a U.S. citizen. These are the three qualifications mandated by the Texas Constitution in order to run for governor here. But there are some informal qualifications. You may recall that we just looked at in the previous lecture. We looked at informal qualifications for Texas legislators. Well, we have similar for governor. So there are some common traits that we see across the board with previously elected governors here in the great state of Texas, right? While these are not constitutionally mandated, to be clear, these are not required, all right? But these are some common traits that we can just simply identify looking in previous elections for governors here in Texas. Right? They are white, Protestant, male, conservative, and experienced. Even in that time period where Democrats had complete control of the state, we were still pretty conservative. So we see these common traits. Now, obviously, these are not required by the Constitution, like I said, but these are just some common traits that we have seen over time. We have a lot more ground to cover, so let's continue on. So, the term of office. The governor is subjected to the elections process. You may recall that we do, in fact, every 4 years, we elect our governor. So, and we can elect them unlimited times since there are no term limits associated with the governor. Right? So, as long as the governor keeps doing a good job, or as long as we keep approving of the governor, a particular candidate can run unlimited times. Right? So the longest serving governor in Texas history is actually Rick Perry. He served from 2000 to 2015 as governor. Let's move on. So, responsibilities. What are the roles and responsibilities of the Texas governor? Well, let's dive right into this. They can sign and veto bills passed by the Texas legislature. This is a power for which they possess, right? This ability to agree, yes, this is an excellent law, I agree with it, that I am signing this into law, or they can simply veto it. I do not appreciate this bill at all. I don't like what it does, so I'm vetoing it, right? Now, of course, that veto can be overridden with the 2/3 majority vote in the House and the Senate, respectively. So, how meaningful is that veto is an excellent question. But yet, nevertheless, he or she has the threat of a veto. The governor does serve as the commander-in-chief of the state's military forces. Right? So we do have a state military, and the commander-in-chief of that military is, in fact, the governor. The governor can convene a special session of the Texas legislature for very specific purposes. We've talked about this a couple of times already, but the idea here is that in that 140 days that the Texas legislature is in session, if there is something that they did not cover or they did not address that the governor views as important, well, he can call him simply back to back to work and have them work on this very specific issue. Now, of course, the Texas legislature doesn't necessarily have to address it in the way that the governor wants, right? They can deal with it any way that they want to, but but the governor can call, he or she can call him back in for that special session. It's just up to the legislature to handle it, if you will, to handle that piece of legislation. Because again, remember, that sandbox or separation of powers do exist and do apply. Very, very important to note that. So another responsibility that the governor has is to deliver a report of the condition of the state to the legislature at the beginning of each regular session. Now, all of this right now, okay, let me back up. So, deliver this report of the condition of the state. This is known as the state of the state address, right? What is the state, the condition for which the state of Texas is in, right? Being the governor, being elected at large, meaning that every county, every voter in Texas gets to vote for the governor here. The governor represents the state as a whole and has more of a bird's eye view, right, of the situation of all Texas, right? So that he or she delivers this state of the state address to the Texas legislature at the beginning of each regular session, letting them know these are the issues that Texans are dealing with. I am pleading with you. Let's deal with these issues and let's get it done. Right? So this is an opportunity to tell legislators what issues are going on all across the state. Because let's be clear, right? Let's be clear about this. Where I grew up in the Northeast Texas area, right? And when a hurricane hit the coast, I was aware of it because I paid attention to the news, but it didn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. Because by the time it got to me, if it did come to me, it was nothing more than some rain, if that. So there are regional differences in what I'm trying to get at. Here in the Houston area, we experience hurricanes very personally compared to other regions of the state, which is why that bird's eye view of the state is important to give to the legislature. Because each representative is only representing a member each member is representing a district that has their own unique interest compared to the state as a whole. Right. So this is important. It gives the governor the opportunity to, give olive branches out to the legislature. It's a way for the governor to give his or her agenda to the legislature, and it's also the ability to, through this state of a state address, to tell us what's going on across the state. Now, whether or not we agree with that or not, whether or not we agree with the state of the state address, whether we agree with what is being said, that's up to debate according to our own ideology, right? But it's interesting to note that this is a responsibility that they have. I'm digressing. Let's move on. So, continuing on with these roles and responsibilities, the governor is tasked with estimating the amount of money required to be raised by taxation. That's a responsibility they have. They also account for all public monies received and paid out by the governor. Recommend a budget for the next 2 years. So while the Texas legislature is tasked with coming up with a budget, it is. That's their task. That is their job. This is a sandbox area here. Appropriation of money, how to use that money and for what programs. This is absolutely within the wheelhouse of the Texas legislature. But the governor has the power, the ability to recommend a budget. Now, that recommendation is not a Texas legislature, you're going to do this or else type of situation, right? Because the Texas legislature could go, Governor, we respect your recommendation, we're not following it. the Texas legislature has that power and that authority. They can do that. Right? So that's the point I'm trying to get across here. While the governor has input, they can make recommendations. That's great. It's one of the responsibilities. It's still up to the legislature, because of the separation of powers, to come up with that budget. Does that make sense? Let me know if that doesn't. Right? I don't mean to be confusing, but it's a little nuanced here. Right? This recommendation versus this is what you shall do. It's different, if that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Let's move on. So the governor can also grant reprieves and communications of punishments and pardons. So in other words, the governor can issue a reprieve. It can issue a pardon for crimes committed at the state level. Right? So remember, this isn't necessary for federal crimes, but definitely for state crimes that the governor can just pardon people. Right? This is a responsibility that they have. Continuing on, though, they get to declare special elections to fill vacancies in certain elected offices. The governor can fill judicial vacancies when they exist. Right? Remember, we elect all of our judges here in the great state of Texas. And if there's a vacancy for whatever reason, a judge was impeached, or decided to not seek re-election again. They decided to retire, or they suddenly pass away. This will create a vacancy situation where the governor can step in and appoint in this case. The governor can also appoint qualified Texans to state offices to carry out the laws and direct the policies of the state government. While some are filled by appointment only, others are elected, but the governor fills those vacancies when they do occur. Right? So the governor has the power to fill commissions, boards, or specific boards, commissions for sure. Right? So this is again a power responsibility they have. Let's continue on with exercising the veto and talking about veto powers. So the governor can veto a law that's sent to their desk, right? We know this. They can simply go, you know what, Texas legislature, I appreciate your effort, but you're missing the mark. I'm vetoing, I'm rejecting this bill. That's what a veto does. A line item veto is different, right? A line item veto is where a governor, and this only applies, let me be clear, let me be sure I say this, it only applies to a budget bill, okay? It only applies. This line item veto can only be used in cases of a state budget bill. That's it. So if a governor receives a, I don't know, a bill that has to deal with gun rights, okay, they can't go, well, I like the majority of the bill, but I'm just going to cut this out, this one small part that I don't, I'm just going to cut it out with a line item veto. He or she cannot do that. Simply just can't. The line item veto can only work and is only used. The Constitution is very clear. The Texas Constitution is very clear about this. It can only be used for a state budget bill. Okay. So veto can be used for budget bills as well. It can be used for any bill, frankly. But the line item veto can only be used in state budget bills. Of course, that can be overturned, right? But actually, let me back up. Let me back up with that. So yes, that the governor can veto a bill, but there's recourse, right? We've already mentioned this already in a previous lecture, but just to note it here, that the legislature can in fact override that veto. It requires a 2/3 vote from each chamber, and they can override that veto. So how powerful is this veto in the end? I mean, it's great that they can threaten it, but that threat can be undone with 2/3 majority vote. Now, it might be difficult to obtain that 2/3 majority vote when you have a chamber of 150 people, right? Especially if it's on party lines. It could be very difficult. But nevertheless, there is recourse for the legislature. I'm digressing. Now let's move on to this other point here, that that the governor must sign or veto legislation within 10 days of receiving a bill from the Texas legislature. Of course, this is excluding Sunday, or it becomes law without the signature, right? We've noted this in previous lecture that the governor, if the Texas legislature is in session, and the governor just ignores a bill, it becomes law within 10 days. If the Texas legislature is not in session and the governor ignores a bill, it becomes law within 20 days, right? So just note that. Again, this legislative override, I mentioned this just a moment ago about this line item veto, about veto in general. That the Texas legislature can undo it, right? It can override this veto. I've already talked about this, so we're just going to continue on, but just note that it's here, right? And that this veto may not be as meaningful as the governor intends because it can be overridden. And let's move on now to the tug of war. So there is a bit of a tug of war between the legislature and the executive. That is the governor, right? The legislature has much more initial control over the budget process. Yes, the governor can make recommendations. Yes, that is a responsibility they have. But in the end, it's still the legislature's task to do that, to come up with the budget, right? To appropriate money. That's still within the wheelhouse solely of the legislative branch. The governor plays no role whatsoever in the legislative budget board. So the LBB, as it's known as, the governor plays no role in that process with the LBB. Right? Executive power to interpret state statutes through agency rulings is something in the wheelhouse of the governor. Remember, when we talk about separation of powers, right? When we talk about the Texas legislature, when we talk about the Texas governor and the Texas judiciary, or even at the national level, when we talk about the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, we need to remember that the legislature only has the power and the authority to appropriate. I say only. They represent us. They pass laws and bills. They are tasked with, taxation in the context of how much tax rate. They are tasked with appropriating money to certain programs, healthcare, education, military defense. They are tasked, of course, this is at the national level, right? They are tasked with all these things. Here in Texas, right, the same thing kind of applies. Texas legislature is tasked with taxes. They're with appropriating money to education, to defense / law enforcement, right? So all these things apply here. Well, it's up to the executive, whether we're talking about the national level or here in the state level, it's up to the executive to interpret laws and to implement those laws, right? So that's within the sole wheelhouse of the executive. Well, the Texas governor here has the power to interpret these laws passed by the Texas legislature. And that's done through agency rulemaking. So executive orders, for example, helps the governor to implement these laws, right? So laws are passed by the legislature, but it's up to the agencies, left up to the executive branch to fill in some gaps that weren't exactly explicit through those bills, correct, right? So he or she, the governor, has the power to mold through executive orders and through interpretation of those laws. Of course, the interpretive powers of the Texas Attorney General, again, another independently elected position within the executive branch. Being the Texas Attorney General has some sway over the legal processes of things here in the state of Texas. So, but again, though, this is separate from the governor because the constituency of the governor is the entire state. The constituency of the Texas Attorney General is the entire state, right? So we independently elect these individuals. So it's interesting to note that here and that dynamic here, right? I digress. Let's move on. So informal powers of the governor, right? Using the position to accomplish goals without actually using political power or constitutionally granted power, right? So what does this look like? What does this mean? Well, breaking bread with legislators. Yes, simply getting lunch with the members of the Texas legislature can help you accomplish your agenda, right? I mean, if you are regularly breaking bread, getting lunch, for example, or with legislators, right? You're not going to be you're extending an olive branch, right? You're extending you're creating an atmosphere of cooperation rather than competition or conflict, right? Because if you're breaking bread with other people, right? They're not going to think that you're an evil bad guy that I need to do everything in my power to stop you, right? No, you take more of the approach of, okay, we disagree on things, but he or she is trying to do the best that they can. And I'm trying to do the best I can. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. But we definitely enjoy getting together and hashing it out over some toast or hash browns, pun intended. But you get my point here, right? Getting breakfast. Using that position as governor to reach out and go out and to break bread, have lunch, breakfast with these individuals. It helps build relationships, helps to achieve political goals that the governor may have. Another one is endorsing future candidates. Yes, the governor, very similar to the president here, can endorse candidates at the statewide or even at the county level, right? Endorsing future candidates can help build relationships, help accomplish goals, right? Let's move on here. So who is in charge? So let's talk about this. When the governor is away, maybe they're on vacation, or maybe they're incapacitated, that they are no longer able to function as governor. Well, if this happens, or maybe they get impeached, I mean, it's possible. When this happens, what happens? Who steps up to basically take over? Well, let's take a look at this. Okay, the Texas Constitution establishes this order of succession, if you will. If the governor is incapacitated or away, well, the lieutenant governor steps in. If the lieutenant governor is away, incapacitated, or impeached, or whatever the case may be, that they are not able to solve, well, then it goes to the Senate President pro tempore. If they are unavailable, incapacitated, away, or impeached, whatever the case may be, they unable to solve, right? Then it goes to the Speaker of the House, the Texas Speaker of the House. If they are away, incapacitated, or impeached, right? Then it goes to the Attorney General. If the Attorney General is incapacitated, away, or impeached, it goes to the Chief Justice of the Chief Justices of Courts of Appeals here in the great state of Texas, and it is ranked. It goes from District 1, which is Houston. It goes then on down to, if they're unable, then it goes down to District 2, which is Fort Worth. District 3, which is Austin. District 4, San Antonio. 5, Dallas. 6, Texarkana. 7, Amarillo. 8th, El Paso. 9th, Beaumont. 10th, Waco. 11th, Eastland. 12th, Tyler. 13th, Corpus Christi. 14th, Houston again. So it goes, we see this hierarchy that if, this line of succession, I should say, that if one of these individuals is incapacitated, away, or impeached, then these others can step in. We have this. So just to note that. Also, an interesting note, it's kind of common for the governor and the lieutenant governor to take a vacation, if you will, to allow the Senate President pro tempore to act as governor for a day. That's kind of a common practice that we've seen other governors do. I digress. Let's move on to the plural executive branch. So, plural executive branch, the definition, because you know I love to begin with definitions. It's a group of officers or major officials that functions in making current decisions or in giving routine orders, typically the responsibility of an individual executive officer or official. It sounds a little complicated, but in reality what this is, it's the executive branch being broken up into many other offices. Instead of being centralized like we see in the United States executive branch at the national level, instead of it being centralized around the president, well, here in Texas, it's diffused. It's separated. We have many other officers serving in the capacity of the executive branch here in Texas. Now, we only have one governor. This is true. But the responsibilities that the governor in other states would have is given out to other independently elected people. And again, this all goes back to our history. But I digress. In Texas, the power of the governor is limited and distributed among others in the Texas executive branch. And I've already mentioned this like ad nauseum at this point. But it's a characteristic of our political system here in Texas, that we have this plural executive branch, and that the power to the governor is limited compared to other states. This is interesting to note that. Let's continue on. So let's dive now into these other officers who serve in the Texas executive branch. So we have first off the lieutenant governor. They are the presiding officer of the Texas Senate. Now, we've already mentioned this already in a previous lecture, but it's worth noting one more time. They are the first in line to the succession for governor. We've already talked about that. They are a member of the legislative budget, redistricting board, rather. So the lieutenant governor has serving as a member, has some sway, has some significant input in the redistricting of Texas state legislative districts. And that's interesting to note, because maybe a specific individual was problematic for a lieutenant governor. Could it be that a lieutenant governor may redistrict them out? I'm not saying it has happened. I'm just asking, can you see a circumstance where a lieutenant governor may take something too personal and decide to use power that's granted to them in order to get even? I don't know. Or maybe I'm just simply making a smoke out of nothing here, which is possible. But anyways, the lieutenant governor is elected to a 4-year term. And again, there are no term limits. For the Texas Attorney General, they serve as the lawyer of the state. So anytime the state has to go to court, right, the Texas Attorney General represents the state. Right? They also represent the state on civil matters. They are responsible for interpretation of the constitutionality of laws. Now, so laws passed by Congress, not Congress, the Texas legislature. The AG is, as it's commonly referred to as, the Texas Attorney General is often just referred to as the Texas AG, or just simply the AG. The AG is responsible for interpretation of the constitutionality of laws passed by the Texas legislature. They are also elected to a 4-year term. You'll notice a little pattern here. And again, no term limits. The commissioner for the general land office, they are responsible for just running the Texas General Land Office, which manages and administers mineral leases and state lands across Texas, which is a pretty significant job when you consider the size of Texas and the amount of materials and minerals that we have here in the state. They are elected to a 4-year term. Again, no term limits. So yeah, that's the General Land Office. Other members in the executive branch include the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Railroad Commission, and the State Board of Education, and other elected appointed boards and commissions. For example, I think they've recently changed their name, but we used to have, they are still there, just operate under a different name. The Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission, which was created by former Governor Rick Perry. He put together this commission to basically spread awareness of genocide education and to help with genocide and Holocaust education in public schools. So that's a commission that was put together by a governor. Those positions are appointed by the governor. So, anyways, I'm digressing. Let's move on. So the Texas executive branch features many limitations to the governor, right? We have the plural executive branch, which, again, instead of all power being centralized around one individual, it's spread out across multiple people that are independently elected. Their constituency is not to one individual, it is to the entire state of Texas. Right? So that can be a hurdle for the governor. There is no cabinet here in Texas, like we see at the federal level. So the governor doesn't have that. We do have an elected judiciary, which, since they're not appointed by the governor has no say, if you will, in what could potentially happen, right? So at the federal level, Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president. And the president always appoints someone ideologically compatible with them, right? So if we took that and tried to apply it to Texas, we can't, because we elect all of our judges. The governor does not appoint them, right? So it's, in a way, it's kind of a safeguard against this idea of court packing. Right? Also, senatorial confirmation. Any appointment that the governor makes, the governor has to get the confirmation from the Texas Senate for it to go for that appointee to take that position. So the Secretary of State, for example, has to receive that confirmation from the Senate. So the governor's hands are tied, if you will. In a lot of power is granted to the Texas legislature. And of course, the executive branch does have power to execute its responsibilities. Of course. It's just that power is diffused and given to multiple people that are independently elected from each other rather than centralized into one individual. So, with all that said, right, we've taken a look at the qualifications, the roles and responsibilities for the governor. We've taken a look at this plural executive branch and some of the responsibilities that each independently elected officers handle. And then we've took a look at some, and we've discussed a little bit of these limitations. So, as always, if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Until next time, peace.